So today we are really privileged. I told you a while ago we had Paul Young, we had Gungor, we've been doing the Shack series, and I said, let's go on a journey together. Open your mind and let God speak to you and let Him challenge you. And so it sort of is culminating here on Palm Sunday, and we've been looking forward to this for a very long time. And we're really privileged to have Tony Jones with us. As you know, he's authored the book, Did God Kill Jesus? And he's been, we were talking last night, he's done a lot of youth ministry things, as I have. And although I found out he has a PhD in theology. So now all the things that I say, he can sort of back me up. How many know what I'm talking about? I know a lot of you guys look at me sideways most of the time. So anyway, no, we're really, really honestly thrilled to have him. Would you please give a rowdy Orchard Grove welcome to Tony Jones this morning? Thanks for being here.
Yep, absolutely.
And so, Tony, what I thought would be great to start with is, I've had people, we've been talking about this book. We've been selling it in the bookstore. For grins, how many of you already got a copy? And
everybody, raise your hands.
And okay, look at that. That's awesome. And it's a fascinating. It grabs you because of the title. Did God kill Jesus? And our staff went through it about a year ago. I think we read it as a staff. So I thought I would start with the most obvious question, which is why? Why did you decide to write a book called Did God Kill Jesus?
Well, you talked about how we've both done youth ministry, and the opening story of the book is from when I was a youth pastor, and I took a group of kids to a weekend retreat that was part of the denomination I was working in when I was in seminary in Southern California. And the culminating talk on Saturday night, I recount in the book, and it was the guy gave a talk that was so bloody and so guilt-ridden. And I'm watching these. These were middle school kids I had taken, so they're 11, 12, 13 years old, and they've got this guy telling them at the zenith of his talk, when he's just whipped them into this like emotional frenzy kind of, and he says, when Jesus died on the cross, He saw your face, and He whispered your name. You hung Jesus on the cross. And these are 12-year-old kids, right? And I thought, man, these kids do not have the developmental wherewithal to know that this guy is preaching a false gospel, I didn't, and I couldn't really stand up. And now the funny thing is, as the story goes on, just to relieve the tension in the room, as the story goes on, I was with a bunch of inner city kids because that's the kind of church I was at, and they weren't kind of hip to evangelical culture, and they didn't know they were supposed to everybody goes forward at the retreat every winter and gives their life to Jesus or recommits their life to Jesus. So when they gave that, then the guy gave the altar call, kind of thing, and my kids were all like, nah. And they got, they all went to the canteen because they were like, there's popcorn and hot chocolate when you're done. And so my kids were like, hot chocolate? And they were out. And all the other kids were like, oh, well, this is when we recommit our lives to Jesus at the end of this talk. But that was just one of those experiences I had where I thought, it was the big dilemma for me. It seems to me, theologically, that the mission of God in the world and the mission of Jesus in the world can't be at odds with one another. Because I firmly believe in the Trinity. That the Father, the Son, and the Spirit have one mission, a mission of love in the world. And the primary version of Jesus' death on the cross, what theologians call the atonement, that thing that happened when Jesus died that made humanity and divinity at one again, brought us back together in a way we hadn't been since the garden, that if it's that God's mad at us and turns His wrath on His own Son, that seemed to me counter to the whole message of Jesus.
So, like, God has a split personality at that point
Yeah.
of some sort, right?
Yeah, somehow
The Father's mad, but the Son's
the
good.
Father's mad. So
but
it's,
they're one.
a lot of us heard these kind of talks in our youth ministries when we were growing up, like, God is so mad at you. When he sees your face, he's disgusted because of your sin, because God is pure holiness and your original sin and depraved. But Jesus stands between us. So it's I use this metaphor.
Good cop, bad cop a little bit.
Yeah, really. Like I even use this kind of metaphor in the book that may be a little over the top, but it's like God's aiming his gun to like take you out because of your sin, and Jesus like jumps at Elliot Ness or whatever, jumps in and takes the bullet for you, you know, and I heard a lot of this stuff when I was growing up in youth group.
And it doesn't diminish the value of Jesus. It just
No.
it kind of makes you question the heart of God, the Father, I guess, in a way, right? Because Jesus
For
is a hero
sure.
either way, right? It's this
Yeah.
angry, wrathful God the Father, which is it's hard to process when you're young, right? The Trinity. Well, it's hard to process at any age.
Super hard to process it when you're young. So, you know, I've done these experiments when I've been speaking at churches and said, like, how many of you have ever heard the phrase, Jesus died for your sins? You know, every hand goes up. And then I'll be like, okay, now turn to the person next to you and explain how that works in 60 seconds or less. And everyone's like, yeah, I don't really know how it works. I just know it's true. And so I'm like, as a theologian, I want to know how it works. Like, by what cosmic mechanism did the death of one person, divine person,
Fix things.
fix things for everybody for all time?
Yeah.
Like, I
We
think...
believe that, but how did it work? And
Yeah,
that-
we
that
should
became-
know. Like, we should know how
Tony,
it works.
did that lead you to your studies, or was it kind of all mixed in together? I mean, did it lead you going, I got to study this? Because you have some really interesting history in here as well, right? When
Yeah,
some of these ideas-
kind of the first thing that cracked open for me was that I was asked to speak at an evangelical college in upstate New York. And like a week before I was going to speak, I got a call from the chaplain who had invited me to speak, and he's like, "Hey, we're taking a ton of heat because you're speaking at our college. Like, trustees are threatening to quit, and they're like never going to give money to our college again because of your views on this. Like they Googled you and found something they didn't like, you know."
Gotcha.
So they're like, but here's how we're going to appease them. Instead of giving 3 talks, you're going to give 2 talks, and your third talk, you're going to debate 2 members of our theology department. I'm like, all right.
Wow.
I can handle that.
All right.
That should be fun. So I give my 2 talks, and at the third talk, I'm like sitting on a stage, and there's 2 members of the theology department on either side of me. This is a Wesleyan school, so it's like the evangelical form of Methodists, okay? And so it's like their student body and then a bunch of local pastors who are there. And so we do some kind of opening statements, and then there's a guy asks a question, and he says, a pastor from the crowd, and he says, you and your friends have said that this one form of the atonement, which we can talk about the technical terms for it, the penal substitutionary atonement, which I can unpack in a second, that you have said and your friends have said that's divine child abuse. You're a heretic. Which, you know, when you get called a heretic at a pastor's conference, the temperature tends to rise in the room.
Yeah, they're not going to serve you lunch.
Yeah, right, exactly. Before I could answer, one of my debate partners, the chairman of the theology department at this school, he was mad. He said, "You cannot call him a heretic, and here's why." Heresy means that you deviate from something that happened in the early church councils, in the first 9 ecumenical councils of the church that happened in the first 1,000 years of the church.
Right.
That's the Trinity. That's the inspiration of Scripture. That's the dual human divine nature of Jesus. There are certain things that
Did I tell you he had a PhD in theology? I mentioned that.
There are certain things that those councils decided.
Yeah.
They never debated the nature of the atonement.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are free as long as you hold the death and resurrection of Jesus as the pinnacle of everything God has done in the world.
Yeah.
How exactly that worked, that's not something that you can be called a heretic for.
Right. So
and I was like,
yeah.
That's
He's
that's
standing
good
up for you.
news,
Yeah,
baby.
yeah. He stood up for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk just for a minute. It's Palm Sunday. We had our own theological debate, and I lost. So we have palms here today because it's very important that you get through your week with a palm. So Palm Sunday.
Palm Sunday, yeah.
Let's talk for a minute about that,
Yeah.
and let's walk into the what happened, and then let's talk about how the church has viewed it. Sort of.
Sure, yeah.
So let's talk about. So it's Palm Sunday, and historically, this is the week that Jesus went into Jerusalem. People wave their palm branches.
Yeah, you've already heard it referred to as the Passion of Christ. It's it's called the Passion Week in more liturgical traditions. And it starts, the Lenten journey started on Ash Wednesday.
Yep.
And Ash Wednesday, and, for more liturgical traditions than probably this one, what you do is you actually keep those palms, and then a year from now they're dried out, you burn them, and that's what you use for the ashes on the forehead on Ash Wednesday.
Right.
And then Lent, which is a word that means lengthening because the days are getting longer, it's the 40-day journey from Ash Wednesday to Good Friday.
Yep.
And then the Passion Week starts on Palm Sunday, and it's, some people have called the Gospel of John a passion narrative with an extended introduction. Like, the fourth gospel is really all about this week.
This week.
Yeah. There's some other stuff that goes before it, but, the Gospel of John doesn't,
And all the Gospels give it an exorbitant amount of time
for
to the
sure.
last week.
This is what it's all about.
Right.
Yeah, this is what it's all
about.
about.
So this is huge.
Yeah.
And what happened on that day in history when the palms were waved and Jesus rides into Jerusalem?
Well, there's
what happened on that day?
Jesus' followers were so perplexed about what it meant for him to be the Messiah. I mean, first of all, there was confusion about whether he was the Messiah or not. And he had this thing that theologians call the Messianic secret, which is one of the oddest things in the Gospels. It's when people kind of figure out who Jesus was, and then he's like, hey, don't tell anybody.
It's interesting.
It's called the Messianic secret.
Don't say anything.
You'd think it would be the opposite. You'd think he'd be like, tell everybody. Let's make these crowds bigger.
Yeah.
But
why does he do that?
Instead, well, that's next week.
All right, that's next week.
Why did he do that? I mean, nobody really knows because he never explains why he says, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
It's an odd deal. We get a little bit of an insight to it when Jesus is coming down from the transfiguration, and he says, don't tell anybody what you've seen, when he's transfigured and Moses and Elijah are on either side of him. And then he says to the 3 disciples who went up there with him on the mountain, don't tell anybody about this until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. And then they discuss, what is it, what does this mean?
Because I think we think, of course, you want to tell everybody all the time.
Yeah.
But I had heard, or maybe I had read, I can't remember, but someone's liking it to, it wasn't the time, in other words, his popularity could have mushroomed too fast, too early. And, do you think there's part of that? Like he's just trying to say, I'm waiting for the right time.
I mean, there's, it could be that. It could be that Jesus' own, this is a controversial thought, so it's just speculative.
Sure.
I'm giving that caveat. It could be that Jesus' own self-awareness of his messianic role had not fully cemented within him yet. This is a cause of a lot of theologians spend time wondering and writing about Jesus' own self-awareness of his messianic role.
It's a really interesting
and of his own divinity.
Yeah. It's a very
because for me, it's theologically very important that Jesus was fully human. Like he really was tempted in the wilderness by Satan.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, I know I'm God, so these temptations are kind of fake. It's like, it was a real temptation. Jesus really experienced humanity.
Yeah.
And so part of it, part of
We talked
any
about
of-
that a little bit last week. It's funny because
Yeah.
I was to like a God switch. Like he didn't switch over to the God mode to get through certain things, right? But
Yeah, I mean, that's
he
tricky.
was human, right?
That's
He
tricky
stayed
if you
in
think
his
that God had
humanity.
like Jesus'
cheat.
divinity was like his trump card, and he was always
Yeah.
like, yeah, we can be all human all we want, but I'm just going to like, boom, God. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, man, there he goes. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus wins every poker game because,
Right.
yeah,
kind of, yeah.
it'd be a bummer. You wouldn't ask him to come to your poker night anymore. So some people say that Jesus' divinity was like, I had a seminary professor explain to me, like, he goes, you know how you look in the mirror and you know you have a back, but you never see it? That's how Jesus' divinity was. He was like, it was something within him, but he didn't. So all this to get to, when Jesus enters Jerusalem on the day we commemorate as Palm Sunday, people were singing his praises. They were shouting Hosanna in the streets. They were throwing palm branches and their cloaks down in front of him as he rode in. Not on a Roman general's horse, but on a donkey.
So they have one thing in mind. They're thinking military
For
or
sure.
political ruler.
For sure.
They're thinking this guy's going to get us out of the mess that we're in with the Romans.
Yeah.
And he's coming in knowing I'm a different. And by the way, he's weeping, right?
Yeah.
As he's coming.
Yeah.
So he knows they don't get it.
Yeah.
I mean, partly for me, the palms to me are the fact that people don't get it, right?
Yeah.
The crowds didn't get it. And
Yeah.
the palms symbolized victory and we're going to win. And so it's kind of a free military parade almost in a way, right? And they're going to celebrate Passover, which is freedom.
Yep.
It's the big festival of the year, a freedom festival for them.
Yeah, military parades and victorious military parades were very common throughout the Roman Empire. So for somebody to come into a town like that, this is, if anybody's ever visited Rome, you've seen these triumphal arches, and when a victorious Roman general or emperor, they would be given a triumph, and when they would come back to Rome, they would parade through the streets with all their prisoners of war and all their booty in front of them, and then the general would come through on a chariot, and they would go under these triumphal arches. And now there's one in Paris that kind of is hearkening back to the Roman Empire, this kind of thing. So for a military victor to roll into a town it would have all the symbolic energy around it, But, of course, Jesus doesn't come in with any prisoners of war or any booty. He's not riding in a chariot.
Yeah.
He's just like a rabbi, and people think...
On a
but there
donkey.
are definitely certain people within, like, his group, his posse, who think he's the next King David.
Yep.
Like, he's going to move back into the temple, and he's going to throw off Roman oppression. Like, these imperial oppressors are going to be kicked out. We're not going to be a colony anymore.
Right.
We're going to be back to a military power in this part of the world.
So he comes into this massive misunderstanding.
Yeah, but meanwhile, in Jerusalem, waiting for him, are these names that we all read in the New Testament of like the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians, and there's another group that some people think Jesus was a part of called the Essenes. Basically, political parties within Jerusalem who are all kind of like struggling for how Israel should be in this Roman empire era. And so Jesus comes in with his own band, and it kind of upsets what was already a pretty tense political situation in Jerusalem. And they're all like, who's this dude? Like rabbi from Galilee?
Yeah.
Like, they're like, goodbye.
Right.
And
the tide turns quickly on Jesus, and then we're going to treat him as we do thousands of other threats to the Roman Empire. We're going to crucify him.
Right. I mean, when you read those passion narratives of what happens during Holy Week, the climax of the story is Jesus turning over the tables in the temple. Like him going into the temple, turning over the tables, releasing these animals that were being sold for the Passover sacrifice, that was the thing that the people who saw that were like, okay,
You can't do that.
like you can preach some crazy stuff on the street
Yeah.
or whatever. You can raise the dead. You don't get to mess with the temple,
Gotcha.
and that's a bridge too far. And so that's really when the tide turned, and like Jesus' death was then imminent. at that
Gotcha.
point. Yeah.
So the crucifixion itself.
Yeah.
Horrible way to die.
Horrible
almost-
way to die, but not unique to Jesus. The Romans crucified tens of thousands of people. Like in the revolt of the slave revolt of Spartacus, which you remember the Kirk Douglas movie Spartacus, and remember at the end of the movie he's like hanging on the cross and his wife and son are in a little chariot, and then like Cecil B. DeMille pans back and you just see like crosses for miles, and that's I think the Romans after they put down that slave revolt of Spartacus, they crucified 6,000 people in like a week.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
in some ways it can be like you think of that and you think, oh, that's kind of disappointing because I thought Jesus' death was unique. That's why I wear a cross around my neck or
Right.
what. But then you think maybe the beauty of Jesus' death on a cross is that it wasn't unique, in that Jesus suffered and died like thousands of others who were on the margins of an imperial power suffered and died.
Yeah.
Like Jesus died in full humanity, not one of a kind,
Yeah.
but like one out of thousands.
So, but in our Christian tradition, we believe something special happened.
Yeah,
And that,
Yeah.
so from a distance, it looked like every other crucifixion.
Right.
But we believe something special happened.
yeah. So
and that's what your book gets
That's what
into.
the book's about, because of course, it's interesting to think about like how Jesus died, and some physicians think you died by crucifixion because you suffocated, and other people think you die of shock or something like that, or you ultimately die of dehydration or something like that. But of course, the uniqueness of Jesus is not that he died, because all human beings die, whether it's in a horrific execution or getting hit by a bus or whatever.
Intended to humiliate, intended to threaten,
for sure,
intended to send a message
for sure.
to everybody. I was reading in Tom Wright's book, I was telling you, like, he was describing how oftentimes they left bodies up there. And animals and vultures would peck away at the bodies. The Romans intended to send a clear message.
It was like a first century billboard.
Yeah.
These crosses.
Right, they put them on the roadsides.
Oh, yeah. On every road going into Rome.
In and out,
crosses.
right outside the city gates often, right?
That's right.
The high traffic areas.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So, you know that old phrase, all roads lead to Rome. Well, every one of these roads in the first century would have been lined with crosses, and some of them would have had people dying on them, and others would have had 3-month-old corpses hanging there that had been picked at by animals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The uniqueness of Jesus' death is that something happened for us in his death. Something unique.
Yeah.
Something that saved us.
Yes.
From what? That's a question. What exactly happened? Was there some kind of transaction between God and Jesus? Was there some kind of thing that happened between God and Satan? Now, these are all the ways. So here's the kind of thesis statement of the book, is this. Jesus' death is the answer. It's the question that has changed. So throughout 2,000 years of Christian history, the church has always held up Jesus' death as the answer. It is the single most important thing that's ever happened in all of cosmic history. It's the hinge point on which everything turns.
Right. This is a huge week.
Yeah.
what we're thinking about, what we're talking
this
about.
is what this
we're
week's
preparing
all
for
about.
Good Friday, yep.
It's why Catholics go and make the Stations of the Cross on Good Friday or go to confession this week. It's why we have Maundy Thursday services where we reenact Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples and the first time he served the Holy Communion, things like that. It's all about this week. But the question, the question of what the crucifixion solved, that's changed.
Yes. So let's talk about the big one. You start with the big popular
the big
idea.
Yeah.
The big let's talk about what that is. The popular idea that's pretty widespread today.
The popular one I call the payment theory of the atonement. Now, atonement is a big word, and it really means what your youth pastor taught you, at-one-ment. Atonement is simply a theological jargony term that means something when two things that are separate are brought together.
Okay.
And that's God and humanity brought back together. We were separated when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, and Jesus' death on the cross somehow brings us back together.
Okay.
That's why we talk about atonement.
Okay.
And
So the payment model is...
the payment model
What?
was primarily written by a guy named Anselm in about around the year 1000. So about halfway into Christian history.
So to me, this is big because
please,
youth pastor
please.
in me, right?
Are you going to build a bridge?
No,
right
here's
now?
the church,
Yeah.
right? This is 2,000 years ago.
Yep.
Right?
Birth of the church.
This is 2,000 years later. This is today.
Yep.
Right? In the middle, 1,000 years. I mean, 1,000 years is a long time. A guy writes a theory or expresses a theory that you're going to describe to us.
And he says, our sin dishonors God. We've taken honor away from God.
Like when your kids act up at the store.
Yeah. So we owe God.
You're making me look bad in the store here. You dishonored me.
And God is the perfect being in all the universe. And God is what God deserves and demands from us is total and perfect honor at all times. But we dishonor God. So now we're in God's debt. We owe God something. And so we go to our bank account. There's not enough in there. There's not enough in your bank account to pay God back everything you owe God. You will always be in God's debt. And so this guy's theory went.
This is what I learned, by the way.
Yeah, this is what we all learned. This is what we all were taught.
Did you guys learn that? How many of you learned this? No one's.
If you've ever heard the one about like, there's a judge. I used this one when I was a youth pastor.
Okay.
There's a judge, and he condemns the criminal to death.
Yes.
And then he stands up, takes off his robe, and goes to the electric chair on behalf of the criminal.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So this person, and so then this is a little bit later version of that theory of the payment theory because it becomes a penalty theory. Like we need to be penalized and punished for how we've dishonored God.
Yeah.
And we can't. You could send us to the electric chair 1,000 times, and it wouldn't be enough to pay back the dishonor we've done to God because we're imperfect beings.
Yeah.
So God has to look around for somebody who can actually pay the debt.
Right.
Jesus, his perfect, sinless son.
Gotcha.
So God looks around. You can't pay it. You can't pay it. You can't pay it. Who can pay it?
He can't just get over it.
Can't get over it.
He can't get over it.
He can't forgive it.
Right.
Because his justice demands payment.
Right. Seems a little weird when you think about it.
When you think about it. Because, for instance, you go back to that judicial...
It's like a dad. I was saying this the other week. It's like a dad that just can't get over himself because one of the kids misbehaved.
Yeah. It's like
I just got to take it out on somebody.
It's like if you grounded your kid and you never had mercy. Like I grounded my 12-year-old this week for 2 weeks.
Really? What do you do? Can we say that?
He was dishonoring to me. I mean, he was disobedient.
Something happened.
He was oppositional.
You grounded him.
I said to him, like, this maybe like shows that I have.
Did you take his hockey away
language
from him?
I'm like, you're being very oppositional right now. He's like, what's oppositional, Dad? But guess what? But I said. But what I did was before I left town, not only because I didn't want my wife to have to, like have him in the house the whole time I'm out of town this
Grounded
weekend.
while I'm gone.
I had mercy, and I was like, you know what? You've been so good this week. I'm wiping out the second week of your grounding. Like, you show mercy to people all the time. We forgive people. And if we can do it, you would think the God of the universe could actually also get over and there's another problem with this theory too. God made us like this, right? God made us fallible, and God knew we were going to sin. It's not like God's like, I cannot believe those people sinned again. God's like, oh yeah, of course they sinned again, but that's how I made them. I knew they would sin. And then if you want to like peel a layer of the onion, another layer of the onion, you go like, well, why did God create us to sin? Well, because God wanted to have a relationship with freely rational human beings.
With freedom.
With freedom to choose for or against God. Like, what joy would it bring to God if we were all just automatons? Oh, thank you, God. Like, you know.
I was thinking of this years ago. My niece had got this doll that you would either squeeze or pull a lever, and I'd go, I love you, you're so pretty. And so she was just all afternoon fascinated with this doll. I love you, you're so pretty. It was automated.
Yeah.
I wanted to just take that thing and wring its neck because, there was it was programmed to say, I love you, you're so pretty. And after a while, it just annoyed you because there's no
And I'm sure by
sincerity.
the second day, even the girl, your niece was like, I'm kind of over you telling me how great I am.
So, and then that's an extreme, but it's kind of true, right? If God made us like wind-up toys that just say, I love you, you're so amazing.
Yeah. And it's just so odd to think of this idea that God made us to be this way, and then he's mad at us for being this way. So he has to kill his own son where is the Trinitarian love between the Father and the Son?
Do you think sometimes us humans project our things onto God? That's what I've wondered.
For sure.
We get so mad about stuff, and so we kind of project this.
Yeah, and every theory of the atonement, and I'll go through other versions of the atonement this afternoon at 5 in that class, and I'll kind of be a little more systematic about them, but every version of the atonement is bound to a particular time. So, Anselm is writing his theory of the atonement right at the time that the Magna Carta is being written. Well, what's the Magna Carta? It's the first constitution.
Yeah.
It's like the Western legal... So, even this metaphor of like the judge, which, by the way, when you hear that on a youth retreat and you're like, I can't believe God went to the electric chair for me. But then later you're a little older and you think like, there's not a courtroom in the world where they would let that happen. If the judge took off his robe and was like, no, I'm going to go to the electric chair for this guy, everybody would be like, no, you're not. That's not how it works.
Anything. Yeah.
You don't get to take that guy's punishment. He's still a criminal. He's still guilty, even if you're dumb enough to go to the electric chair for him. We're still going to, make him pay for his crimes too. So, but yes, for sure, these kind of judicial, legal understandings of Jesus' death make a lot of sense to us because we live in the most litigious society in 10,000 years of human history. Our society, most litigious, most laws, most lawsuits, most judges, most police forces. In the year 500, if you would have used this kind of metaphor and a judge and a jury and an electric chair, they would have been like, had no frame of reference for that.
A couple of things. We're gonna run out of time, and we're just getting in. But let me do the best I can say. That there's a class tonight. Tony's gonna do a class on this. Now, I want to say a couple of things. This is a lot. This is huge in terms of some of you grew up with this, and this is what you know, and so you kind of maybe rocked some people a little bit hard.
Hope so.
And you don't expect, I hope so, but you don't also expect that you can just flip a switch and go, I get it. So it's a process of, I guess maybe that doesn't make sense.
And I would also say that there are verses in the Bible that talk about Jesus as our substitute. I mean, Paul uses that substitute kind of language, that Jesus did something that we couldn't do. So I'm not trying to say this isn't at all valid. I'm just trying to say there are a lot of ways, if you think of it this way, it's like the cross. You can shine one spotlight on it from one angle and see it one way, or you can shine spotlights from multiple, and you can see a more kind of fully beautiful cross by knowing there are a lot of different ways to understand it.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to blow this one off and say it's totally wrong, just saying like it's one of several versions of how we understand Jesus' death.
Yeah, yeah. And one that was introduced late into the game.
Pretty late, yeah,
which
pretty late.
now 1,000 years, it feels like it's been around forever.
Yeah.
But if you back up further, it's like, well, it's not so original, in other
Right.
words.
Yeah.
So
Thanks so much for watching today. If you like today's message and are interested in connecting with us further, just visit our website. The website is also a great place to watch the message you saw today and many others, along with ways to connect and support or to grow. We hope you enjoyed your time with us today, and be sure to tune in with us again.